We're going to have so much fun today. How would you like to create circles in a home decorating project? Putting together a sew booking page, designing lace with machine embroidery, and learning another time-saving trick with the serger are additional bonuses. Of course, I will love to share with you something wonderful from my vintage collection. I'm so glad to have you as a special guest in my sewing room. Let's get busy. We are going to have so much fun today making circles with a circular stitch attachment. There are a few secrets before we get started. First of all, the fabric really needs to be stabilized. We've used an iron-on stabilizer here and then probably another stabilizer underneath, like a tearaway. Look at all the different things you can do with the circular stitch attachment. You can use the braiding machine, the braiding foot, and use rickrack or braid and adding that wonderful texture and dimension. You can use the multi-cording foot and put several different colors of cords. Isn't that pretty to have the 3 different colors? Just a straight stitch will make beautiful circles too. Here is a circular pattern with a straight stitch. You want to have some fun with that straight stitch? Let's do one and then move over a little bit and put another one right on top of it. Isn't that pretty? Now, you want to use those double needles? Yeah, I love twin needles. Okay, let's make circles with twin needles. And once again, give a little bit more interest. Let's put the twin needle circles on top of each other. Applique, which is one of my favorites, can certainly be done in a circle. We have one circular piece which has been attached, and then the second circular piece which has been attached. Now this technique is really pretty. This is the double ruffle with some braid, and this particular technique is what my guest is going to share with you today. I am so happy to have as my guest my dear friend Chris Tryon. Chris is the National Events Manager for Baby Lock USA. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Martha. It's a pleasure to be here.
This beautiful pillow.
Oh, thank you.
Chris, I just think it's fabulous.
Well, we're going to learn how to do it. So
with those, with the ruffle and the braid. 3 of them.
And the circular stitch attachment, don't forget that.
We love the circular stitch attachment.
So the first thing, as you mentioned, was a stabilization of the fabric. And usually what I do is I stabilize my fabric first with some type of iron-on stabilizer. And then if needed, depending upon the technique or the stitch that I'm going to use when using the circular stitch attachment, I may add a tearaway stabilizer. When you use a circular stitch attachment, my suggestion is if you don't get a template that comes with that attachment, that you create your own by stitching out all the different circle sizes on something like duck cloth or canvas, something that you can reuse and reuse. But my best tip of all is the painter's tape. And I use painter's tape on the bottom and top of where the little thumb tack is going to go so that it doesn't damage or ruin my fabric and doesn't create such a large hole. So that's a key tip to remember.
When it goes around and round?
Correct, when it goes around and round, because there's a little bit of stress on the fabric at that point every time it goes around, and then of course you provide a little bit of stress too when you push and pull. Then what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to create the ruffle, and to do that I took a strip of fabric about 3 inches wide, folded it in half and pressed it, and then used the ruffler attachment and then press the ruffles flat. That's key. Okay, then I created my template for where I was going to place the ruffle by using the circular stitch attachment, creating, in this case, I've got my outside circle where I'm going to attach my ruffle, and then I've got an inside circle, and then on the pillow I had an additional circle because there were 3 ruffles that I wanted to attach. So once I've got those already on my fabric piece, the next step is actually to attach that ruffle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of my stitching lines as my guide line on top of the first line that I stitched on my base fabric. So I'm going to lower my presser foot with a touch of a button, and as you can see, all that I'm doing is lining up my fabric and my ruffle. And the machine is stitching while the circular stitch attachment is just moving that piece around in a circle.
That was magic sewing.
Yeah, it was magic sewing.
Look,
but this is,
no hands.
Yeah, but this is more magic. This is a little bit more magic.
We like magic.
The braid, okay? I didn't want that raw edge, okay? And I don't want to turn it under because it's too thick. So I'm going to cover it with braid. So what you're going to do is you're going to place the braid over that raw edge, and you're going to stitch on the outside. Okay, so then we're going to come over to the sewing machine and we'll actually place the braid in place. I'm lining up the edge of the braid with the stitching, and you can see both my hands are concentrating on aligning that braid, and the attachment is actually moving the fabric for me. Now there is one more hint or one more trick I usually suggest is to lighten your foot pressure. Most machines have a standard setting of 3, and depending upon what I'm doing, I may take it to a 2 or a 1 so that everything moves around. The final step after you do the outside circle, as we did here, is then to go to the inside circle as we've gotten the pillow to complete the process.
Oh, Chris, that is beautiful and so much fun.
Oh,
I cannot wait to go home and sew circles.
Oh, that's great. I hope everybody feels the same way.
Thank you, Chris. And now Chris has some perfectly magnificent sewing inspirations for you. Chris, tell us about these beautiful black and white pillows you have.
I love to. This was actually a really fun. This was a really fun project this time around. The first thing I did was I actually painted the fabric first.
The shiny.
Exactly. Okay. And really, all that you can do is your home deck department in stores have big stencils for painting the walls or painting.
Oh,
so go and grab one of those, and I used a fabric paint that could be set by an iron, and I cut my pillow sizes roughly the size I wanted them, and then positioned my stencil on top so I could get the pattern or repeat on a pattern, and I painted them. Then I went and did the circular stitching, and I just did rows and rows and rows, as you can see, of circular stitching. And then I cut it apart. That's the hardest part, is to cut it apart. And in this case, I started cutting, going down every 2 inches.
Okay.
And then I placed a strip of fabric in between, and the goal of it was to kind of create an optical illusion that you look at. And then the medallions were painted and then silver leafed.
All right.
Yeah.
And this is another...
Same thing, cut apart.
Same thing.
Yeah, painted the fabric, the medallions.
But with an entirely different
With
look.
an entirely different direction and entirely different size of circles. So experiment. And the same thing was here. This was actually 4 circles on a rectangle.
What is this?
And this is, of all things, the best place is after Christmas clearance garland. Crystal garland, yeah, and I just put it on the pillow.
How beautiful.
And that one, we just, it's a big square. I cut it into 4s and then rotated the circles and added fabric in between to kind of create a flow through. And again, it's painted fabric using a stencil.
Okay.
And this one is overlapping circles, many, many, many circles, and painted fabric. And I did the same thing on this one. And you can see when they overlap, they kind of create another dimension or another look.
So
beautiful. Lots of fun. And this one, I did the same thing.
Wow. Now wait, overlapping
circles. Yeah, I started with the center one, and then I went to the outside one, and then I just
and look at this.
And then this one, 4 of them right on top of one another. And what I use rather than a straight stitch, so I get a little bit more dimension, was most machines have it is a triple straight stretch stitch, which is 3 straight stitches on top of one another. So then it really, the stitch popped, it didn't fade so much into the background fabric.
Wow. Thank you, Chris.
Oh, you're more than welcome.
And now Chris has a sew booking segment for you. Chris, this picture is heavenly. Tell us about it.
Oh, this was actually made on the embellisher. No sewing required. So actually this type of techniques are the techniques I'm going to show you anybody can do from the age of 6 on up to...
And this is your grandmother?
This is actually, yes, a picture of my grandmother, and I liked it because it was in the 30s or 40s and she was in pants, which wasn't very common. She's unusual for women. That is. Okay. So what I'm going to go over real quick is just the materials that I used in there so people have a better understanding of that. The first thing I start off with, which is my base, which is a duck cloth or a canvas, something a little bit heavier. And then the background was actually silk dupioni that I cut into strips. And then we use silk organdy, silk chiffon, silk ribbon, these great little things called silk rod carriers, which have been hand dyed. And most all this stuff that I've used is hand dyed materials. And then I have over here a bunch of just silk fibers that are hand dyed that haven't been put into any type of thread or yarn. So when you use the embellisher, the great thing about it is, like I said, there's no thread required. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to show you how these 12 needles, which have tiny little barbs on it, react with the fibers. What they're going to do is, they're actually going to stress those fibers, or in a sense, push them into, and you can see here what's going on, is they've pushed those into the base, and by doing that, it's created a different texture. And see, if I'm going down the center here, I've actually created a ruffle using that silk. So now if I go over to the silk organdy, and you can see what happens here too, is that will do the same thing. It will mesh those two fibers together, and if I put them on top of one another, what I do is I create something that's totally different and something that's totally new. Now, the silk ribbon, that's probably my funnest piece to use, is it will take it, and can you see how it's gathering it?
Yes.
And scrunching it, and that's just simple silk ribbon. Okay.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Beautiful, beautiful.
And then these fibers, which I have in the sample, all that I did was I positioned and placed them. And we're going to raise up the presser foot just ever so slightly. And I'm going to press on the presser foot to tap them in place. And then I go back over and I just use my fingers to kind of smush them back together, if that's a term.
Smush is a wonderful term.
Yep, smush them back
and
together.
You can just put a little bit of everything down.
And you just keep layering. That's what I kept doing, is the silk was in the background and I layered organdy over it, and I just kept layering things on top of one another and top of one another. And then on the picture, what I did was I cut strips, and I put the strips, gathered them around the edge of the photo.
Chris, thank you so much.
You're more than welcome.
And now I have a wonderful idea for you on machine embroidery. I am so pleased to have as my guest today Pam Mahshie. Pam is Ambassador of Education for Baby Lock USA. Pam, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Martha. Thanks for having us today. And today we're going to talk about dining in lace.
Oh, this beautiful dress.
Isn't it beautiful?
Oh, yes.
And the way that this is created is we have motifs that are actually stitched on a dissolve-away mesh stabilizer, and then they're joined together to create this beautiful bodice in that ecru in black. And then as we come down the skirt, you can certainly see that we've taken that same type of motif and stitched them out individually and then attached them together to create this lovely border on the bottom of the skirt.
This exquisite adult dress, and I think you have a beautiful child's dress too.
Right, and here we've taken that same type of motif and we've made an adjustment to it for the size. If we look at the top of the bodice and then down at the bottom of the skirt, these two motifs are exactly the same, except the size of them has been changed. And our Dining in Lace gives us that option. Here we have some other options available to us, and as we work with the Dining in Lace, again, Dining in Lace is created for us to create stemmed wear ID holders. We can also take and create the napkin rings, and also a wine bottle cozy that wraps around. And this is exactly how we had done the bodice, where we've stitched them out individually and then we zigzag and joined them together. So let's take a look at the computer and see how we're going to be making these. Now, as we come into dining in lace is available, and we can certainly create coasters, borders and trims, the little napkin rings as we looked at, a centerpiece, the wine duvet, which is that bottle cover, goes around the drink ID. So when we have a party and we're wanting to make sure that we each have our individual glasses, we can make them in different colors, a cute little candle wrap, and then there are individual elements that we can combine together using our basic shapes. Now let's go back to the centerpiece. When we looked at the beautiful bodice on that dress, we certainly didn't need to have the flower on the end of that centerpiece. So then I can simply click on None for the center. Now, do we want to have a flower on this centerpiece? We can click Yes, or we can click No, and the flower will go away. The interactive design, and we can also scale our motif that's in the center. This flower that we have on the tip of our centerpiece, we can simply uncheck that, and we have the diamond shapes that we use to create those bodice pieces. We can also create a different width. So if we don't want to stitch 100 of these and we only have time to stitch out 50, we can certainly change the height and the length of this particular motif. We can also change the different style. Maybe we want to have more of a holiday theme, or we're wanting to have a Christmas theme on the inside. We can change to different types of shapes. We can also change to different styles of borders, whether we want to have little candle wicking on the outside or wanting to have a split trim. And when we go to the borders again, we can also change to a different length. We can select the different style of flower motif that we have. And once we've selected those and made the design exactly the way we want them, we simply then write it to our USB jump drive, or using our USB cable, we directly connect it to our sewing machine. We stitch them out using water-soluble mesh stabilizer, rinse that out, and piece them together.
Oh, Pam, this is so much fun. These beautiful dresses, all the different things we can enjoy, our sewing machines and our embroidery machines. Thank you so much, Pam. And now I have a fun segment for you called I Love My Serger. I'm so pleased to have as my guest today, Kathy McMakin. Kathy is Executive Vice President of Martha Pullen Company. She's a Martha Pullen licensed teacher and also teaches at our licensed teacher programs. And she's an instructor at the Martha Pullen School of Art Fashion in Huntsville. Kathy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Martha. It's a pleasure to be here.
You're going to talk, I think, about these wonderful, not just these wonderful jackets, but about the techniques used to make this fabric perfect when you sew it, when you serge it, rather.
When you serge it, all serged.
And the jackets have two variations. One has a set-in sleeve, and one is just two pieces.
That's exactly right, which makes it very easy
and so wonderful to wear.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All righty. The thing that is I don't want to say difficult, because it's not, as long as you have a serger with a great differential feed. And most of our sergers today do have a differential feed. Differential feed means that you have a front set of feed dogs and a back set of feed dogs. And those feed dogs, when your serger differential feed is set on a 1 or normal, those feed dogs work exactly the same, as if there were no split in them. But if you change the differential feed to either greater than 1 or less than 1, then you're going to change that so that you are either squishing the fabric together if you go higher than 1, or you're going to be stretching the fabric out if you go lower than 1. So the question with this knit is, where do we put our differential feed to make our stitches come out beautifully, our seams come out beautifully? So we have 3 examples here. We have one example with just a 1, which is a normal differential feed. So if you look at this lower example, you can see that on 1, our fabric tends to be a little squished and we have all these wrinkles down here. The seam looks okay, but it's not exactly flat. Now, when we move up to this example, you can see that this is actually stretching the fabric out way more than it should, because do you see how we end up with a seam that is not flat at all? So we need to reach a happy medium between these two. So we don't want it to squish it together and we don't want it to stretch it out. So in order to do that, you just need to run a couple of samples and see which one that you need to land upon so that your seam looks like this one. This seam, as you can see, is very pretty, and our fabrics in our seams lay perfectly flat. This was set on a 1.3 to 1.5 differential feed. Now, one of the tricks, and there are many, but one of the tricks that I've found that is just so valuable in sewing with this is wash away basting tape. Wash away basting tape is a product that is sticky on both sides, but you have a paper backing on one side. So you can stick it down on a piece of fabric, remove the paper, and then stick the other side to it. And that's exactly what we've done on this little sample right here. So in between these 2 layers of knit is a strip of wash away basting tape. Now you just stick them together. And then we have also made a slice into the fabric. This is going to be our fabric that will be cut away by our serger, and our seam will end up right on top of that wash away basting tape. The reason we cut this in there is because sometimes when using fabric like this, when we use the cutter on our serger, it tends to separate the fabrics at the very beginning. But now we have them glued together and we don't have to worry about that because we're not going to cut right at the beginning of our seam. Now I'm going to place this underneath my serger, and I'm going to place that little cut that I put in there on the right hand side of my blade. I'm going to raise my foot and I'm going to slide this fabric all the way back to my needle so that the first stitches that I will take will be on my fabric. Now also, as I sew, I'm going to be sewing right on top of that wash away basting tape, which will add, it will act like a stabilizer for this piece. And you can see it kind of looks like it's going to be squished up when it comes out, but no, it's really not. When we lay it back down, you can see that the seam ends up perfectly straight. We end up with even pieces on each side. Now, very quickly, we're going to talk to you about shoulder seams. To do a shoulder seam, you'll probably want to add a piece of clear elastic to that seam. And so you can see the clear elastic right here put in right on top of that, right underneath that seam. And we would do that with these shoulder seams. We would actually glue the elastic, and then we would glue it down to the top of that shoulder seam. And so that's how easy it is to sew on this fabric with your differential feed, your wash away basting tape, and your clear elastic.
Oh, Kathy, thank you so much. And I do love these jackets.
Well, I loved making them.
And now I would like to share a piece from my vintage collection with you. This blouse that I have today is a very unusual piece, one of the most unusual in my collection. I'm going to show you why in just a second. It has a wonderful collar with the 3 tucks and beautiful embroidery, beautiful lace shaping down the front, absolutely beautiful embroidery, which this kind of embroidery you can recreate today on your sewing machine. But the secret to this is a nursing blouse, and I don't have but one in my collection. Can you see there? It's a nursing blouse. And it's interesting to me that mothers have been nursing children a long time, and I guess they did have to go out of the house occasionally. And the back is closed with 3 tucks, and the buttons all the way down the back. And you can see I've got some repair that needs to be done on this, but I don't ever worry about that. I thought you would just love to see that nursing blouse. I want to thank you so very much for joining me in my sewing room today. I hope you've had a lot of fun, and I'd like to invite you to come back next time.